Speaking personally, there's a lot of anxiety that comes with story writing. Since I've tried to take writing more seriously in my private life, I've noticed how self-deprecating I am when it comes to my own work. While it's definitely good to have a healthy amount of criticism, often I found my own feedback only served to stop my productivity. Recently, while rediscovering a story that I liked a lot, I looked into the author and was inspired by some of their methods. So in today's video, I'll be sharing what I've learned from 3 separate authors in the hopes that I will help others manage their anxiety when it comes to telling their own stories.
Stars and Stripes!
Hello and welcome to another Carrot Scraps video, and by another I mean the 133rd. And as usual, I wanted to give a quick disclaimer up front. Like many of my videos recently, this video is not as scripted as a lot of my older videos. In fact, I actually did write a script for this video, and then I just decided to ramble instead. It's just something that's been working for me with videos recently, helping me to get my thoughts out there more naturally, and also to get videos out faster. Again, writing out the video actually helped me get my ideas out pretty well, and then it was easier, if less elegant, for me to kind of ramble and talk from what I remember what I wrote rather than just reading what I wrote. But anyway, the point being, if I make any mistakes or if my opinions change in the future, that's part of the reason why. Anyway, what you'll be watching while I talk about these authors is gameplay from the video game I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, which is of course both based on and kind of a sequel to one of the stories I'll be talking about today. So I thought it was appropriate to play while I talked. Lastly, I just wanted to mention that the reason why I thought it was interesting or important for me to talk about writing in this video and on the channel right now is because I kind of made a promise to myself before the new year started. Call it a New Year's resolution if you want. Anyway, what I wanted to do this year was to be more serious about my writing. I've been writing for a long time and trying my best to take it seriously, and I've always had this issue with not being able to finish stories, which is part of what this video is about, you'll find. But I made a New Year's resolution to myself that by the end of 2023, I would finish at least one story. I'm not sure exactly what that means, whether that's a short story or whether that's a long format story. I haven't quite decided yet, but the point being, I'm taking writing a lot more seriously, short story writing specifically, and expressing myself and my thoughts on writing and authors that I find interesting or that inspire me, or even authors that I avoid, is helpful to that process. So that's also part of the reason why this video comes to you today. Anyway, without further ado, let's talk about these authors and how they've inspired me. Padding is somewhat of a derogatory term for writing, I've found. It's kind of the fluff in between the big events or the big plot points of your story, but sometimes it can be really important, and I think I've always looked at it as a very necessary part of writing. But one of my favorite writers, Clive Barker, is someone who I feel doesn't use as much padding as I thought you had to when it came to writing a story. When I was re-listening to a lot of his audiobooks and rereading some of his short stories, I realized that a lot of his writing doesn't just leave out padding, it's like it's almost completely absent. Now again, this is just my interpretation of his work, but that's the feeling I get when I take in a Clive Barker story, that there's really no fat and it's just events. And padding is, again, something that I hear used very derogatory, right? Like, people talk about padding in a negative way, and I do as well, but at the same time, when I write a story, one of the first things I think of is, I need to put padding in between these events. I can't just have things happen. I need to put the connective tissue in between. And something that I learned from Clive Barker and rediscovering his work recently, his written work especially, is that I don't need to do that. If I don't want to include padding, I don't have to. I can just tell a story and include the parts that I want to, or the parts that I think are important. Now, I don't think that necessarily makes a perfect story, of course. I'm sure you'll hear me say that a lot in this video. Removing the padding or just telling event by event doesn't guarantee a great story, but it does guarantee a finished story. If somebody's really interested in stuff that happens in between their big plot points, or if somebody really does feel like the padding is important, then it probably is, you know what I mean? And I'll admit, even though I love Clive Barker stories and he's one of my favorite authors, there are some of his stories where I'm like, okay, what is happening here? Like, a year will pass in the span of 2 paragraphs, and it'll be hard to focus because there's so little padding. So in one instance, it's something that I love and am inspired by his work, but in another instance, it teaches me the importance of why, you do need to focus on fleshing out these stories sometimes. But that being said, again, I initially, get kind of halted by the prospect of, I have this idea, but then I need to add padding. And the thing is, forget about writing a good story. Writing a story is what I'm trying to accomplish here. And by reading Clive Barker and also listening to his work, I've realized that I don't need to add the things that I don't want to add. If padding isn't interesting to me, then don't do it. Again, doesn't matter if it's good or bad. We're looking for a finished story here, and I just feel very inspired by the fact that Clive Barker seems to go by the beat of his own drum. He just does what he wants, he writes what he wants to, and sometimes that's perfect and fantastic, and sometimes it's a little bit more risky and it doesn't turn out as well as it could have. So that's the first lesson that I've learned from the first writer that I absolutely love, is if you don't want something in your story, if you don't feel like it's necessary, don't add it just because you've heard that that's what's supposed to be there, or because you think that that's what's supposed to be there based on other stuff that you've read. While that might be there for a reason, while those techniques might be important, finishing a story, doesn't have to be following in the footsteps of everyone that came prior. So that's what I've learned first. Zach Cregger is the director and writer of the recent horror hit, Barbarian. He is somebody who didn't start as a horror writer or director. He started in the world of comedy, and he's now made a pretty big name for himself in the world of horror with this, debut project that he's worked on. And I watched Barbarian, and I absolutely loved it. I'm a horror fan, and I'm a fan of this particular creator's work, and it was just a good movie in general. But when I started looking more into Zach Cregger and the stuff that he's done in the past, and also looking into his writing and his kind of approach to writing Barbarian, I started to learn something really interesting, and I was kind of inspired by just a very simple aspect of his writing process. So Zach Cregger was asked a lot about, his process on writing and, whether he thought through the entire story from front to back, from beginning to end. And his answer to that was no, for the most part. Barbarian was not intended to be a film. It was not intended to be a public piece that he was writing. The way he tells the story, from my understanding of it, from me hearing it a couple times, is that he was just doing this as a writing exercise. He just wrote the first part of the story. There are 3 kind of distinct stories in Barbarian, and he wrote that first part on a writing prompt, and he was so fascinated by it that he kept going. And by the time he was close to finishing, or by the time he finished it, it became something bigger that eventually, ballooned into its own film. But that was not the intention, when he was writing the story. And when people ask him, again, it's a story that kind of is better when you go back and watch the beginning and see how the ending affects the start and see all the clues that lead forward and back. When people ask him if it was thought through all the way, he says no. Again, he let the story take him all the way through. And so I think the thing that I learned here is, and this is something that he even states himself, is you don't need to know a story inwards and out before you start writing it, especially before you start writing it or before you finish writing it. I think that's another big anxiety I've had when writing stories, is I can't start page 1 or even the first paragraph until I know the beginning, middle, and end. And even if I know the beginning, middle, and end, I need to think of subtext, and I need to think of every single character's backstory. In essence, I need to think the entire thing through before I, start and finish it. And again, as usual, while that is a great practice, that's not that that's a bad thing. That's actually, quite a good thing. Many writers tell great stories by doing that. While that is a good practice, it's not necessarily what has to be done. It's not the strict thing that needs to be done to write a good story. And in some cases, Barbarian included, you can tell an incredible story that, captures and captivates so many audiences with, a writing style that doesn't think through the entire story. And so that's just a little something that I was inspired by with Zach Cregger and his story of writing Barbarian, is that, I can just start with an idea. I don't need to know where the idea ends. And, you know, there are plenty of stories where I know the beginning, middle, and end, and I still don't start it because I feel I don't have enough. Just go in it, just do it. And again, that's a very freeing idea to me, that I can kind of just start with a concept or start with a beginning, middle, and end and flesh it out as time goes on and let the story kind of, you know, morph on its own. I hope that I have stories in the future that I know completely, you know, from every single angle before I start page one. But at the same time, it's okay if I start a story that isn't like that. And that's something, again, that has been very nice to hear and very nice to remind myself and very freeing to know. The last story and writer that I wanted to talk about today, and the last thing I learned from them, is kind of the inspiration for this video. Clive Barker and Cregger are two people that had inspired my writing recently, you know, prior to this story. But when I revisited Harlan Ellison's I Have No Mouth, but and I Must Speak, you know, it's a story that I was already familiar with. It was a story that I had liked and was fascinated by when I was younger. But when I rediscovered it now, I just took a deep dive into the writer, and they really, you know, just this one little simple fact about this story that I didn't know prior really set me free. And there's actually a lot that I learned from this story, but I'm going to keep it to this one idea. And that's that, you know, this story is hugely influential on the world of science fiction and on the world of writing in general. It's one of, to my knowledge, one of the top 10 like most reprinted stories ever written. It is analyzed and you know, retold so many different ways. This is an important story. And yet, Harlan Ellison wrote it in one night. According to him, from my knowledge, he wrote it in one night. He just wrote this in one night, and I didn't know that until like last month. And this is something that, again, really has captivated me. That a story that can be so influential on culture and writing, and that can be so profound. You know, I love this story. I think the story is fantastic. And this story could be written in one night. That idea really does blow me away. Now, again, as I've said, should all stories be written in one night? No, of course not. Typically, that's probably not going to produce the best story. But the sheer fact that one of the best stories, or at least one of the most famous stories, one of the most influential stories, even if you don't think it's a quality story, you know, it is renowned. You know, a story like this could have been written in one night, in one night of passion, of fury. That is immensely inspiring. And so that has been something that I go into every night, and every time I write a story, you know, it's just such an encouraging feeling to sit there and start paragraph one and say, tonight could be the night that I write a story that I love. Not even the best story ever written, right? Just a story that I love. I'm so self-deprecating that it's hard for me to even think that I could write anything. So the idea that somebody could write a story that is this influential on culture can inspire me to say, maybe tonight's the night I write a story that I love, you know? And that is a really profound and powerful idea, and that is an idea that has really stuck with me. And that's the idea that started this video. So those are the three writers and the three ideas that have really captivated me and really inspired me when it comes to my writing this year in 2023. I appreciate you listening to me. I know this is a very rambly video. I did have something written, but I decided that tonight I was just very passionate and I wanted to speak for myself. So I had my notes and I just went for it. But you know, it's important for me to articulate this, especially as somebody who is trying to get better at writing. And even if I'm not better at writing, just trying to be more confident in my writing, right? Like, even if my writing sucks, I like writing. I like telling stories. And the only way I'm going to be able to do that, and this is something I've learned over time with everything, not just writing, but creating anything. The only way I'm going to be able to continue to create and create more things and create things I'm proud of is to just start creating, you know? I think my whole life I've been kind of caught up on making the best thing and kind of afraid of making bad things. But the thing is, I have to make bad things to make good things, and I have to just make. You know, my first thing could be perfect, it could be amazing, but I'll never know that if I don't make. And so I think these three ideas have been the most captivating to me personally. Learning from Clive Barker that I don't need to put things into my story just because I've heard that they're good things from other people, or just because I've heard certain stories do them. You know, I've approached writing from this standpoint for so long that I have to do things certain ways. I can't write a book because, you know, I have to start by doing this part of the book, and I don't know if I like that part of the book, or I don't know if I have that yet. Forget about that. You have an idea, you can write about it, then go. Just start writing. That's what I learned, you know, from Clive Barker and, you know, his lack of, you know, just doing what other people have told him. And then when it comes to Zach Cregger, you know, I don't need to think my story through three-dimensionally. I don't need to have every detail thought out. Sometimes a concept is enough, and sometimes whatever I have is enough. Even if I do have the start and the end, that's okay. Just go with that. You know, just start writing and see where it takes you. If you have the beginning, middle, and end, great. If you don't, that's okay too. And then lastly, with Harlan Ellison, and I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, you know, you could be a foot away from your first great story. You could be a foot away from the story that you like. You could be a foot away from your perfect story. Whatever it is, you know, you are capable. Anyone, literally anyone is capable of writing a perfect story in one night. So why can't you or I be capable of writing a story that you like in one night? That is such a beautiful idea. And you know, those three ideas combined have done so much to help motivate me and inspire me to write more than I ever have in the first month of 2023 than I've been trying to for the past year and for the past 10 years of my life. I've been trying to write for so long, and I've had all these hangups, and just these three lessons that I've learned from these three writers that I respect have done so much for me. And I hope that describing what I've learned from them and how they've helped me can help you in some way as well. Anyway, that's gonna do it for this video. I wanna thank you so much for watching. If for some reason you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a like and to subscribe to my channel for more. As regular viewers know, I make a variety of content on my channel, and I'm always gonna make the videos that I wanna make. But if you see something you enjoy, make sure to let me know, and I'll try to prioritize that kind of content in the future. If you wanna watch me play video games live, I typically play superhero games over on Twitch, like Marvel's Avengers, Midnight Suns, Marvel Snap, and occasionally the horror game like Resident Evil. So if that sounds interesting to you at all, make sure to check out my Twitch channel, twitch.tv/carrotscraps. Also, as a reminder, on February 10th, which should be soon, I'll be streaming to coincide with the Gamers for Trans Rights event, which is an amazing event that I'm really proud to be a part of, and it's raising money for a great cause. So if that sounds interesting to you at all, definitely make sure to check me out on Twitch. And all my other social media, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram are at carrotscraps as well. So I want to thank you again so much for watching, and I'll see you soon. I wish there was a point-and-click PC video game for all my favorite horror and science fiction short stories. In fact, I wish there was a point-and-click PC game for all of the Clive Barker stories. I feel like that would just make me very happy. If anybody is just sitting at a computer looking for something to program, that's it. There's your idea. Go. I'll fund the project. I'll fund it all. If I have money, which I don't.